In today's video, I want to take a look at some of the rumors that have been floating around for things we might see happen in the offseason. Plus, I also want to take a look at some of the comments that come into the Edmonton Oilers organization recently from Bob Nicholson, as well as some updated comments from Mike Babcock on what we discussed yesterday on a potential rift between him and Kyle Dubas. We'll get into all the latest coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, we have some NHL updated rumors here for things we might see happen during the offseason. Now, of course, this is a slower time of year for NHL news. We're past the trade deadline. We're not yet to free agency. We're waiting for the playoffs to start. So there's not a whole lot of talk and speculation. So obviously these videos aren't as common as they used to be leading up to the trade deadline. But there's still plenty of things that are being discussed that are throughout the hockey world here that we might see happen later on. Now, first, I want to get started with the LA Kings on a couple potential trades and a potential new head coach. Obviously, they have Willie Desjardins as an interim coach between now and the rest of the season here, and I wouldn't think he'll be back next year, but that's just my opinion. But getting into some potential trades here, as we discussed before, Jonathan Quick very well might be a potential trade target, and the theory is around the league is that there's going to be many teams taking a hard look here at pending UFA goalie Sergei Bobrovsky, and those who don't land him would be very interested in obviously making upgrades in other areas, might have to do it through trade, and Jonathan Quick might be the guy that they look to here. Many believe he still has some good years left and can bounce back and help lead a team into another deep playoff run, potentially another Stanley Cup. Obviously, he's got a great history and some Stanley Cup rings with the Los Angeles Kings, so certainly comes with quite a pedigree and a nice resume. So we'll see what happens here, but there's lots of teams out there that could be interested. One team to kind of keep your eye on as well is the Calgary Flames. Now, of course, the Flames are in first place in the Pacific right now. Things are going relatively well. More likely, Mike Smith does not return next year. He's a pending unrestricted free agent, so he's likely not going to be re-signed. We'll see how Rittich does in the playoffs, and depending on how things go, and obviously if they make a deep playoff run, they might decide to run with Rittich. It's really hard to say, but if they end up losing out early on and decide to want to make some upgrades there or bring in some more experience to work with Rittich, Quick might exactly be that perfect type of player. Obviously, they get some other contracts to look at, like Matthew Tkachuk this summer. They might have to be creative in how they do things to make everything work for the salary cap purposes as well. So, be interesting to see how it goes. But Jonathan Quick more than likely would be a player of value that the Kings can trade here to kind of get their rebuild underway, that they can get some value. And they do have some other goalies in the organization, I think, that are fully capable of taking over here and helping this Kings get a little bit younger and freeing up some cap space here to do other things to improve their club. Now, there's also some belief they could look at trading Nail Yakupov, but obviously there's also some belief that they might want to hang on to him and see how he gels with the new coaching staff, and depending on what the team looks like next year, obviously they'll probably have discussions with Kovalchuk to see what he wants to do as well. He is under contract for 2 more years, so we'll see what happens, but he's not a player for sure that would be traded, but there is some belief that they might want to hang on to him as a veteran guy on the team to see how he meshes with the new coaching staff, which is a nice segue to who the next coach might be. There is some belief that the LA Kings might look to former Oilers and Sharks bench boss Todd McLellan, who was recently fired earlier this season from the Edmonton Oilers organization. Now, of course, things didn't go for the greatest for McLellan in Edmonton, but he does have a really good history in the past. Obviously, with San Jose, was there a long time, had a lot of success. Obviously, before that, he worked with Mike Babcock as an assistant. Obviously, that was a great experience for him as well. And he does have some history with LA Kings general manager Rob Blake. Obviously, Blake played for the Sharks at the end of his career. So obviously, he had McLellan as a coach himself, so he knows his style. He knows what he's like in the dressing room. He knows what he's like with, certain types of players, and it's believed that their history and their relationship very well might lead to him hiring McLellan to be the next coach here of the LA Kings. Now, there was some reports from Russian media indicating that Nail Yakupov might be making a return to the NHL, which is kind of surprising considering he just left the NHL after numerous seasons of failed attempts to be a regular solid NHL player. There was a report out there linking him to the Arizona Coyotes, and that same report indicated that there was 2 or 3 other Western Conference teams taking a real hard, serious look at Yakupov, but those reports do appear to be untrue, so if you see those come across them anywhere, I wouldn't put much stock into them. I mean, he has had a pretty decent bounce back year in the KHL, but I can't see teams jumping at the opportunity to bring him back here to the NHL after 1 season over there. I wouldn't completely rule it out for the future. if he can get his game together over multiple seasons, then it is possible. If he wants to come back on a short-term, cheaper contract, maybe. But if you do see those reports, there apparently is absolutely nothing to them. Now, it's also believed by Larry Brooks, who covers the Rangers quite closely in New York, that Chris Kreider will either be extended or traded this summer, possibly if he is traded at the draft, as maybe one of the bigger deals we might see this summer here. He believes that the Rangers are not going to go into next season with him on an expiring contract, but at the same time, they did that this year with Zuccarello and Hayes and traded both at the deadline, so I wouldn't be completely ruling out the possibility they could do the same type of approach with Kreider. I do think that they have some interest in retaining him, but obviously, they have to analyze, what he's going to want for a contract, what his results have been individually, and is he worth keeping around? I know he's been a pretty solid player for them for the most part during his career. Brooks believes that if an extension's not worked out early, that he very well could become trade bait as early as the draft. Now, of course, the draft takes place before July 1st, but even though they can't sign Kreider to an extension until July 1, they could certainly be having early discussions with him to see what the numbers are going to look like and see if they can work out a deal. And of course, they themselves have to decide if that's something they even want to do. If they decide that they'd rather move him, that certainly would be a good opportunity to try to maybe get another higher pick or something, or another package deal to improve their already decent amount of picks they have for the draft. So as we know, the Rangers are trying to get younger, faster, more skilled. Moving Kreider very well might prove to be helpful in making that happen, but at the same time they do have to have some veterans around, and he could fulfill that role as well. So hard to say what happens. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think Chris Kreider extends in New York, or do you think he would be traded this summer as well? Now, of course, we saw Bob Nicholson of the Edmonton Oilers have some pretty harsh comments here regarding forward Tobias Reider at a season ticket holder event. I'm going to put up a little summary here on the screen to read through what he had to say. Here's a summary of Nicholson's comments. He says, Tobias Reider will not be signed by the Edmonton Oilers at the end of the year. Tobias Reider was a player that other teams wanted. He came here for 1 year because he wanted to play with Leon Draisaitl, who he's played with on the German national team. He thought if he was playing with Leon, he'd be playing with Connor. He'd score at least 15, 16 goals, and instead of making $2 million, he'd end up signing a 4-year contract extension at 3.5 or more. Tobias Reider hasn't scored a goal at all. Tobias Reider has missed so many breakaways. If Tobias Reider would have scored 10 or 12 goals, we'd probably be in the playoffs. Well, I think this is completely ridiculous on Nicholson's part. Obviously, the Tobias Reider experiment in Edmonton has not worked out, and the fact that he won't be re-signed is really not a big secret. I think most people would expect, looking at the numbers, that he wouldn't be a player they'd bring back. He has played with Draisaitl in the past, and as soon as he signed, it was pretty clear that that connection was the reason why. And yes, it makes sense that Leon plays a lot with Connor. Really, that if he could get on the line with those guys, his numbers would be good, and it has been. But at the same time, to make these kind of comments and to say if Reider would have scored 10 or 12 goals and been in playoffs is completely ridiculous. There's way more problems on that team than just one player, and certainly him scoring a little bit more would have not made that much of a difference. Now, it could have made a small difference, but really, if you look at their overall team and the forward group and the lack of depth scoring, the problems the defense have had, the goaltending hasn't been great. There are so many problems with the Oilers. For him to blame one player is completely absurd. Now, he had immediately, as soon as this went public, basically said that he regretted making the comments and apparently has talked to Tobias Reider about it. He said, according to Darren Dreger, that he was told they had a good laugh about it, but I highly doubt Reider was laughing. These are some pretty hurtful comments, and obviously Reider won't be back, so for anybody looking for free agent forwards, you can look to Tobias Reider if you're interested. The types of public comments from a senior member of the Oilers staff like that really is uncalled for, and it's just kind of embarrassing in my opinion for the Oilers. Obviously, we've talked recently about the Toronto Maple Leafs potential issues with the growing rift between Dubas and Babcock. Here is some comments here from Mike Babcock on a follow-up situation here to the story that broke here in the last couple of days, with many media members discussing this possible disconnect between the two members of the Leafs staff. Babcock says, what's interesting? My first general manager in NHL was a gentleman named Brian Murray, and one of the first things he told me, he says, as a coach and a general manager, never let anyone get in between you, and if you do, you're going to be in trouble. So that relationship's so important. Whatever people speculate or think, I don't believe that's the case. I know Doobie and I talk all the time. We've talked about this since it happened. How would I say it if any of my comments in any way? Because when I read the article, I don't read it like that at all. But if any of my comments were in any way hurtful to anybody, it wasn't intended. We talked about this the other day with our players. When I come to talk to you people, if anybody's wife's reading it the next day and they feel hurt, they've done the wrong thing. That's not my intent. One of the comments was about depth in the organization, which we've got to keep improving our depth. We all know it. That's what Doobie's trying to do. That's what Jimmy Palafito, our pro scouts, myself, Sheldon, developing players, we're all trying to do it so that we can get to be like these teams. Tampa to me is, just a model of what depth is, and it doesn't matter if you get guys hurt or not. If there is any slap to anyone, it sure wasn't intended. That's not what I meant to say. Now you guys live in Toronto too, right? So obviously Mike Babcock doing some backtracking here, and I still kind of believe that there is a little bit of a disconnect and difference of opinion, which isn't entirely a bad thing. And these types of comments tend to be made when teams are struggling and not, having things go their way. Obviously, like I said in that Leaf video discussing the situation, winning does kind of solve everything. So they can get the, some wins down the stretch, get into the playoffs, have some success, get past the first round. I think a lot of these issues are going to go away. I really don't think the Maple Leafs as an organization want to have Babcock or Dubas leave or have anybody fired here. But at the same time, there does appear to be a little bit of a growing disconnect between the two philosophies. So we'll see what happens here down the stretch and into the playoffs. So as always, let me know your thoughts and opinions and everything we discussed here today, and we can continue the conversation down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.